Imagine, if you will, a land so ancient that even time itself seems to pause when it whispers through the wind. A land where two mighty rivers, the Tigris and the Euphrates, flowed lazily across a fertile plain, carrying life, mud, and stories to anyone patient enough to notice. This land, dear listener, is called Mesopotamia, the very cradle of civilization. And if you lean in close, very close, you can almost hear the faint tapping of styluses against soft clay tablets, the first whispers of humanity trying to make sense of itself. Now, before your mind drifts too far into comfort, imagine the first cities rising out of the marshes. Not skyscrapers, not glass towers, but humble mud brick houses, winding streets, and markets where the smell of barley, fresh bread, and occasionally goats filled the air. People walked barefoot, scribes scratched their stories into clay, and children ran along the riverbanks, probably kicking over mud pies with absolute delight. And somewhere in all this, humanity was learning ever so slowly to organize itself, to build, to trade, to dream, to write. You see, the cradle of civilization isn't just a place, it's a feeling. It's the quiet realization that long before Instagram, TikTok, or even Netflix, humans were already curious, already ambitious, already counting sheep and barley and wondering, why am I here? And so they recorded it all, not in paper, not in pixels, but in clay, the humble, everlasting mud of the earth. Some historians say the Sumerians, those fascinating, mysterious, slightly obsessive humans, were the first to do all of this. But before we meet them, imagine the plain itself, endless fields stretching under a sun so bright it could make a stone sweat, rivers that carried fish, reeds, and the occasional lost sandal downstream, and skies that at night sparkled with stars humans had never named. Yet this was a world waiting for stories, and the Sumerians were ready to write them. And oh, what stories they wrote! Kings who ruled for decades, possibly centuries, farmers who counted goats like a ritual, and scribes who knew that every wedge-shaped mark in the clay could echo across millennia. Every tablet, every record, was a clue, gentle whisper that says, we were here, we tried, we dreamed, and we built something you still wonder about today. So, as you drift along this river of time, picture yourself wandering through one of these first cities. Hear the clink of clay, the hum of the marketplace, the soft chant of a scribe counting barley once more, and realize, slowly, that you are not just reading about history, you are floating through it, cradled by the earliest humans' hopes, mistakes, and discoveries. Every civilization after them, Egypt, Greece, Babylon, borrowed from this quiet, muddy beginning. Every law, every trade, every story has echoes of the first scribes' clay tablets. And yet, how little we truly know about them. How much remains hidden, waiting for patient eyes to notice. And that, my friend, is exactly what makes the cradle of civilization so endlessly fascinating. So take a deep breath, feel the warmth of the sun on your imagined shoulders, and let the soft, slow whispers of Mesopotamia settle in your mind. Because we are just beginning our journey through clay, mud, and mystery. And by the time you finish this chapter, you might find yourself quietly obsessed with a civilization that existed thousands of years ago, but whose stories are still very much alive. And if you enjoyed this slow drift into the ancient world, don't forget to like and subscribe, and let me know in the comments from where you're watching. Close your eyes for a moment and imagine people so clever, so quietly ambitious that they decided, one day, to build the very first cities out of nothing but mud, reeds, and determination. These people were called the Sumerians. They lived in the southern part of Mesopotamia, a land cradled by the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. Long before most of the world had even considered the concept of civilization. Now, the Sumerians were not like us in some ways, and yet, in other ways, they were almost too familiar. They laughed, they argued over barley rations, they loved festivals with music and dance, and most importantly, they wrote things down, everything. And when I say everything, I mean everything. The number of sheep a farmer had, the amount of beer in a tavern, and even the occasional complaint about a neighbor who borrowed my goat and didn't return it. They were farmers, yes, but also traders, inventors, and storytellers. Imagine someone wandering into your backyard and saying, "We're going to build a city here." And then they did. Slowly, carefully, brick by brick, canal by canal, they transformed marshes and muddy plains into bustling urban centers. Uruk, your Lagash names that sound like magical spells from a storybook. Yet these were real places, humming with life thousands of years ago. And while their cities were growing, the Sumerians themselves were evolving. They invented writing, laws, mathematics, and probably the world's first version of bureaucracy. Yes, bureaucracy. Can you imagine being a Sumerian accountant? Carefully recording how many jars of beer were delivered, who drank them, and who still owed a debt? Your life would be thrilling in a way that involves clay tablets and endless counting. Their appearance, according to ancient depictions, was as simple as their daily lives were complex. Men wore skirts of wool, women wore long dresses, and both often covered their heads against the blazing Mesopotamian sun. They adorned themselves with jewelry, enjoyed music, and perhaps occasionally wondered what the stars meant long before telescopes or planetariums existed. But there is more than just everyday life in their story. The Sumerians believed in gods who were very much like humans, but bigger, older, and sometimes more mischievous. Each city had its own patron deity, and the temples, called ziggurats, were enormous, pyramid-like structures where people would gather to pray, celebrate, and, perhaps, gossip a little about which god was in a particularly bad mood that day. And yet, despite all their ingenuity, the Sumerians were remarkably fragile. Their rivers could flood, their cities could be attacked, and their knowledge, recorded carefully on clay, could be buried and forgotten. But somehow, much of it survived. Clay does not rot easily. Mud does not crumble overnight. And so, the story of the Sumerians whispers to us across thousands of years, inviting us to listen, learn, and marvel. So who were they, really? They were dreamers, doers, scribes, farmers, and builders. They were people not unlike you, except their internet was the soft clay in their hands. Their Facebook posts were etched wedges, and their TikTok dances might have been elaborate barley harvest ceremonies. And yet they laid the foundation for nearly every aspect of human society that would follow. As you picture them in your mind's eye walking along canals, tapping on clay tablets, singing to the sun and the stars, remember that these early humans were inventing civilization itself, slowly, day by day, clay by clay, and somewhere in the quiet of their ancient cities, they were probably imagining you thousands of years later, reading their story and wondering at their lives. The streets are narrow and winding, made of packed mud, and the air smells of fresh bread, wet mud, and the faint tang of the river. This is Uruk, one of the first true cities, bustling with life thousands of years ago. People are everywhere, farmers bringing baskets of barley, merchants shouting softly about the finest clay pots, and children running barefoot along the canals, splashing water and laughing. Can you hear the distant tapping? That's the scribes at work, scratching wedge-shaped marks into clay tablets, recording every trade, every sheep, every tiny detail of life. Homes are made of mud bricks, simple but surprisingly sturdy. Inside, families cook, weave, and craft small jewelry. Life is slow but purposeful, with everyone playing a part in the city's rhythm. The market is full of colors-woven fabrics, clay bowls, bronze tools all arranged carefully, almost like a painter arranging a scene, except this one smells of bread and barley instead of paint. The temples, or ziggurats, rise high above the city, catching the sun in golden rays. People visit to pray, celebrate festivals, or just watch the sun set behind the great mud brick towers. Life in these cities is communal. Everyone's days intertwine, their stories etched into clay and carried forward in memory. And yet, even in their busy lives, there is a quiet magic, a slow rhythm that flows like the rivers themselves. The Sumerians are inventing civilization, yes, but they are also inventing patience, routine, and observation. Every day, every trade, every tablet adds to the tapestry of history that will echo for thousands of years. So, as you imagine walking those ancient streets, remember, life may have been simple, but it was alive, rich, and quietly brilliant. And somewhere in the soft mud and gentle sun, the Sumerians are still whispering their stories to you. Imagine a world without texting, emails, or even paper. A world where, if you wanted to remember something, you had to be clever. The Sumerians were exactly that kind of clever. And so, they invented writing. Not pen on paper, not ink on scrolls, but cuneiform, wedge-shaped marks pressed into soft clay. Picture a scribe sitting cross-legged, a clay tablet in front of them, and a tiny stylus in hand. Slowly, deliberately, they press each mark into the clay, counting barley, tracking sheep, or recording a trade. Each wedge is a little piece of memory, a way to say, "We were here, this happened, remember this." At first, it was simple pictographs of sheep or jars of grain. But over time, the marks became abstract, symbols for sounds, syllables, and even ideas. This tiny innovation, done with fingers and mud, would change everything. Suddenly, humans could share knowledge across generations. A farmer could leave a record for his children. A king could announce his laws. Stories could be told long after the storyteller was gone. And here's a funny thought. Imagine your modern text messages carved into clay tablets. Instead of, you'd have a wedge-shaped scratch. Instead of emojis, little pictures of goats or cups of beer. It might be slower, but it would last thousands of years. Cuneiform became more than just a toolet, became a bridge between human minds, a gentle rhythm of tapping and pressing that preserved history in mud. Slowly, softly, each tablet told a story of people learning, living, and dreaming. And somewhere in the soft clay, you can almost hear the whispers. We are here. We tried. We wrote. The oldest Sumerian records are not stories, not legends, not grand declarations. They are practical, everyday lists etched into clay thousands of years ago. Barley rations, sheep counts, trade transactions, even simple notes about workers and taxes. To the modern eye, they might seem mundane, almost boring. But therein lies their magic. These ordinary details survived 5,000 years, carrying the rhythm of daily life from one of the very first civilizations. These tablets vary in size and shape. Some are tiny, delicate enough to fit in your hand, yet each one holds an entire universe of information. Others are larger, heavy, almost like little bricks, full of numbers and marks that at first glance seem indecipherable. And every single mark is a piece of history, carefully pressed into clay by a scribe who had no idea that their work would one day be studied by people far, far in the future. Most of these records were created for practical reasons. The Sumerians were meticulous. They kept track of everything: grain, livestock, workers, and trade with neighboring settlements. But over time, as scribes practiced and refined their writing, unexpected stories emerged. Notes about festivals, lists of offerings to gods, even instructions for building temples, all quietly preserved in wedge-shaped symbols. Some records are so precise that they reveal early knowledge of administration and economy: who worked on which day, how much barley they received, and what debts they owed, all carefully documented. It's a window into a society that, though ancient, was astonishingly organized and thoughtful. What makes these records truly remarkable is their endurance. Clay, once baked or dried, is nearly indestructible. Fires, floods, and the passage of millennia could not erase the Sumerians' meticulous notes. Today, archaeologists study these tablets, slowly deciphering their symbols, uncovering the lives of people who lived long before even the earliest civilizations most of us have heard of. In every wedge-shaped mark, there is a whisper of daily life, a hint of the human mind learning to organize, plan, and communicate. These were not kings or grand heroes. They were scribes, farmers, and merchants, quietly shaping civilization one tablet at a time. And their work, preserved for thousands of years, continues to speak softly across the ages, inviting us to listen. Clay tablets might look ordinary at first glance, just hardened mud with wedge-shaped scratches. But if you look closely, they hold secrets, not treasure chests or gold, but quiet, remarkable insights into how the first humans thought, lived, and dreamed. Some tablets record mundane transactions: how much barley was traded, who owed a debt, or which worker tended which field. Others are more surprising: instructions for building temples, lists of ingredients for beer, or even early legal codes. Every mark is a clue, a tiny window into a civilization that existed thousands of years ago, quietly organizing its world. One tablet might reveal a scribe's clever joke or complaint. Another could hint at an unusual event, a festival, a flood, or a mysterious visitor from another city. The Sumerians wrote things down because they mattered to them, and in doing so, they left a map of human curiosity. Some tablets even contain the earliest myths and stories, tales of gods, creation, and heroism, hidden among lists of sheep and grain. It's as if they wanted future generations to discover not just what they did, but what they thought and believed. In these simple clay rectangles, the ordinary and extraordinary exist side by side, waiting for patient eyes to uncover them. Archaeologists still study these tablets today, slowly decoding the wedge-shaped marks. Each discovery can change how we understand early human history. Sometimes the secrets are small, almost mundane. Other times, they hint at ideas that seem far ahead of their time: astronomy, law, mathematics, and stories that still echo in our world today. So, the next time you hear about a clay tablet, think of it not as a piece of mud, but as a quiet messenger from the past. Every scratch tells a story. Every mark holds a secret. And every tablet connects us to people who lived long before us, but who were, in their own way, just like us. Long before modern science or history books, the Sumerians had their own way of explaining the world through myths and creation stories. These weren't just entertainment, they were how people made sense of life, the heavens, and the rivers that sustained them. According to their stories, in the beginning there was only water, endless and still. From this water, the first gods emerged, shaping the earth, the skies, and even humans themselves. Humans were created to serve the gods, to tend the land, grow crops, and offer gifts so that life could continue in balance. It's a story that mixes wonder, fear, and the quiet logic of survival. One of the most famous myths tells of the gods splitting the heavens and the earth, creating the rivers, the mountains, and the fertile plains of Mesopotamia. Another story explains the creation of humans from clay and divine blood, echoing the very material, the mud, they used for their tablets and buildings. In a way, every clay tablet is a reflection of this story, a small loop of life and creation preserved across millennia. These myths weren't just abstract ideas, they shaped daily life. Festivals, rituals, and prayers were all tied to the creation stories. People honored gods who controlled the rivers, the sun, and the harvest. They told these stories repeatedly, like lullabies, or gentle reminders of the world's order and chaos. And there is humor hidden too. The gods were not perfect, they argued, became jealous, and sometimes acted in very human ways. In these tales, the Sumerians found a mirror of themselves, clever, curious, and occasionally mischievous. Their stories were rich, layered, and surprisingly relatable even thousands of years later. So, as you drift with these ancient tales, picture a world shaped by rivers and mud, gods and humans, clay and barley, all intertwined in stories meant to explain why we exist. These creation stories are whispers from the past, inviting you to pause, reflect, and slowly absorb the beginnings of human imagination. The Sumerians believed that the world was alive with gods and divine beings, each with their own personality, desires, and quirks. These weren't distant, untouchable figures. They were present in every river, every field, and every breeze that whispered through the city. Each city had its patron god. In your people honored the moon god Nana. In Uruk, the goddess Inanna ruled over love, war, and strange surprises. These gods could be kind, granting fertile harvests, or unpredictable, sending floods, droughts, or the occasional angry goat stampede. Sumerians prayed, sang, and offered gifts to keep the gods happy or at least entertained. The gods were remarkably human-like. They argued, feasted, fell in love, and sometimes acted a bit mischievously. In one tale, a god loses a temple decoration and causes chaos while searching for it. In another, gods debate how humans should live, sometimes disagreeing for days. These stories were a way to explain the unpredictable world, the floods, the droughts, even the quirks of daily life, while adding a touch of humor to serious matters. Temples, called ziggurats, were the meeting places between humans and gods. Rising high above the cities, these stepped towers symbolized the connection between earth and sky, humans and the divine. People would climb them, bringing offerings and prayers. while the gods watched from above, sometimes responding with blessings, sometimes with challenges. Even in their mysteries, the gods taught lessons. They reminded people to work, to care for the land, and to respect one another. They shaped human behavior, not just with fear or power, but through stories that reflected human nature itself, curious, clever, and sometimes a little mischievous. So as you drift through the soft whispers of these ancient gods, picture a world where the divine is playful, where every river and reed has a story, and where humans learned slowly, carefully, to live alongside the powers that shaped their lives. The Sumerians' gods were not just figures of worship, they were mirrors, lessons, and companions across the riverbanks and clay streets of history. The Sumerians looked up at the night sky with curiosity that rivaled their curiosity about the rivers and fields. To them, the stars weren't just sparkling lights, they were messages, patterns, and guides. Slowly, carefully, they began to track their movements, noticing cycles, rhythms, and even the occasional strange wandering star, which we now call a planet. They divided the sky into sections, giving names to constellations and connecting the stars with stories. These stories weren't just entertainment, they helped them predict seasons, plan harvests, and organize festivals. The moon, in particular, was sacred, guiding both their calendar and daily life. Sumerians noticed its phases and learned to track time in months, long before clocks or watches existed. Mathematics and astronomy were intertwined. By observing the stars and planets, they could calculate cycles, predict eclipses, and even schedule religious ceremonies. Their skies were a map, a calendar, and a divine canvas, all at once. Some tablets even contained diagrams of planets and constellations, showing how carefully they studied the heavens. And yet, there was a sense of wonder and humility. The stars were vast, the universe mysterious, and humans small. In their myths, the gods often lived in the heavens, watching over the world below. Every bright star was a silent teacher, reminding the Sumerians to observe, record, and respect the patterns of nature. So, as you lie back and imagine the Sumerians tracing the stars with quiet eyes, feel the calm rhythm of the universe. Slowly, softly, the night sky becomes a friend, a guide, and a mirror for human curiosity. Their early astronomy reminds us that even thousands of years ago, humans were looking up, dreaming, and learning from the universe, one careful observation at a time. The Sumerians were not just farmers, builders, and storytellers. They were also surprisingly skilled mathematicians. Their mathematics was practical, precise, and astonishingly advanced for a civilization over 4,000 years ago. They used numbers to measure fields, divide grain, track time, and even calculate angles for building canals and temples. They developed a sexagesimal system, which means they counted in 60s instead of 10s. This is why we have 60 minutes in an hour and 360 degrees in a circle. Every time you check a clock or measure an angle, you are still following the Sumerians' clever system. It's a quiet reminder of how their ideas have survived for millennia. Their mathematics was recorded on clay tablets with wedge-shaped marks. Some tablets contain multiplication tables, geometric problems, and even exercises for students learning to calculate areas and volumes. It wasn't abstract or theoretical, they applied it directly to farming, trade, and construction. For example, they could determine how much grain a field would yield, or how much mud was needed to build a ziggurat, all with careful calculations. There is even evidence that the Sumerians had a sense of fractions, ratios, and basic algebra. They could divide fields into equal plots, share resources fairly, and predict quantities accurately. In a way, their mathematics was a tool for survival as much as it was a sign of ingenuity. These ancient mathematicians remind us that human curiosity is timeless. They weren't just counting for fun, they were learning, building, and shaping the world with numbers. Every wedge on a tablet represents a mind thinking clearly, carefully, and creatively. The Sumerians were not only inventors of cities, writing, and mathematics, they were also shrewd traders. Their cities thrived because of careful commerce, moving goods not only within Mesopotamia, but also far beyond its rivers. They traded barley, wool, and pottery for timber, precious stones, metals, and luxury items they could not produce themselves. Trade required organization, record-keeping, and trust. Clay tablets were used to document transactions, track debts, and ensure fairness. Merchants would record who brought what, how much was owed, and even interest rates for borrowed goods. These weren't casual notes, they were meticulously recorded contracts that held the Sumerian economy together. Trade routes stretched from the river valleys to distant lands. Donkeys and boats carried goods along canals, rivers, and deserts, connecting cities in ways that seemed surprisingly sophisticated for such an ancient civilization. Some of these routes brought the Sumerians into contact with faraway peoples, spreading knowledge, ideas, and goods in a slow, steady flow. Markets in Sumerian cities were vibrant hubs. Farmers, craftsmen, and merchants gathered, exchanging not only goods, but also stories, news, and gossip. Imagine jars of barley stacked beside bundles of reeds, baskets of wool next to bronze tools, and the air alive with the hum of commerce. These marketplaces were essential to the growth of cities and the spread of civilization itself. Economics wasn't just practical light-shaped social life. The wealth generated by trade-funded temples, ziggurats, and public works. It allowed scribes to record laws, myths, and business transactions. Even ordinary citizens were part of this system, contributing labor, goods, and knowledge to the broader community. Through their trade networks, the Sumerians were early architects of globalization. Slowly, methodically, they connected lands and people, showing that human ingenuity can extend beyond city walls, rivers, and mountains. Every trade, every tablet, every route contributed to the foundation of civilization, leaving lessons about economy, organization, and connection that endure to this day. Life in Mesopotamia was simple yet structured, ordinary yet fascinating. People woke with the sun, tending fields of barley, wheat, and vegetables. Farmers plowed the soil, irrigated their crops using canals, and counted their livestock carefully. Their work was hard, but it was the backbone of civilization, supplying food for the growing cities and their bustling marketplaces. At home, families cooked meals over small hearths, baked bread, and brewed beer, the Sumerians' favorite drink. Children learned practical skills, helping in fields, weaving cloth, or assisting their parents in shops. Schools were small but rigorous. Boys learned reading, writing, and mathematics, while girls often helped manage households or craft textiles. Clay tablets were their textbooks, and styluses their pens. The city streets were alive with activity. Merchants called out prices in the market. Craftsmen hammered bronze tools or shaped pottery, and fishermen hauled nets from the rivers. Festivals brought music, dance, and offerings to the gods, creating moments of joy amid daily labor. People believed these celebrations kept the gods happy and ensured a good harvest, blending routine with devotion. Sumerian homes were made of mud bricks, often simple but surprisingly durable. Roofs doubled as spaces for sleeping on hot nights or drying crops. Most homes had a small courtyard, a place for animals, cooking, and family gatherings. Life was communal. Neighbors knew each other, shared resources, and worked together to solve problems, whether repairing canals or preparing for floods. Even leisure had its place. Games, storytelling, music, and occasional jokes brought moments of laughter and lightness. Scribes recorded daily events, noting everything from work and trade to strange or humorous happenings. Every day, ordinary actions became part of the tapestry of life, preserved on clay for generations to come. Daily life in Mesopotamia was both practical and poetic. People labored, traded, celebrated, and learned a delicate balance with the rivers, the land, and the gods. Slowly, patiently, they built a civilization that would influence the world for thousands of years, leaving whispers of their lives for us to discover today. In the earliest cities of Sumer, people didn't just live and work, they were guided by kings and rulers. These leaders were not only political figures, they were seen as intermediaries between the gods and the people. Their role combined governance, military command, and religious duty, all wrapped together in a delicate balance that kept the city alive and thriving. The Sumerian kings were recorded carefully on clay tablets, sometimes ruling for decades, or according to legend, for impossible spans of hundreds or even thousands of years. While those extreme numbers may be myths, they reveal the Sumerians' fascination with order, power, and legacy. Kings were expected to build temples, maintain canals, and lead armies, ensuring that the city prospered and the gods remained pleased. Temples and palaces were the centers of power. From these places, rulers oversaw trade, agriculture, and justice. Laws were written, disputes settled, and decisions made to protect both citizens and crops. Kings often displayed their wealth and power through monumental architecture, commissioning grand ziggurats and statues that symbolized divine favor and civic pride. Some rulers were brave warriors, leading armies into battle to expand their city's influence. Others were visionary organizers, improving irrigation systems, building roads, and strengthening trade routes. Each king left a mark, recorded on clay tablets, which preserved their accomplishments and sometimes their failures. These records ensured that their deeds or misdeeds would echo far into the future. Even the smallest details mattered. Kings kept careful accounts of resources, workers, and offerings. Every decision, from how much barley to store to which god to honor, was part of their responsibility. Life under a king blended the divine, the practical, and the political, shaping the rhythm of the city in subtle and enduring ways. The first kings and rulers remind us that leadership has always been about balance between people, resources, and belief. Their legacy, recorded in careful writing, still teaches us about organization, vision, and the importance of connecting daily life with higher purpose. Slowly, quietly, these rulers helped build the civilization that would influence the world for millennia. The Sumerians loved stories, not just for entertainment, but as a way to explain the mysteries of life. Some of these myths are strange, whimsical, and sometimes eerily familiar. echoing across cultures and centuries long after Sumer vanished. Take, for example, the story of a great flood. In Sumerian myth, the gods sent a massive deluge to punish humanity. One man, warned by a god, built a large boat to survive. This story of survival, divine warning, and a new beginning appears in many later cultures, suggesting that ancient Sumerian tales may have traveled far and wide, shaping the myths we know today. Other myths describe gods behaving like humans, falling in love, quarreling, playing tricks. Inanna, the goddess of love and war, journeys to the underworld, facing challenges that test her strength, cleverness, and patience. These stories teach lessons about courage, perseverance, and the consequences of one's actions, universal themes that still resonate in modern storytelling. The myths often mix everyday life with the supernatural. Farming, rivers, seasons, and city life appear alongside gods, monsters, and magical events. In this way, Sumerian myths served as both entertainment and education, guiding humans on how to live in harmony with nature, society, and the divine. Some of the tales are deeply symbolic, hinting at early philosophical ideas. They ask big questions. Why are humans here? How should they live? What is the balance between order and chaos? Slowly, softly, these myths whisper answers, inviting reflection and imagination. Even today, echoes of Sumerian myths appear in stories from Babylon, Greece, and beyond. They remind us that ideas can travel, transform, and endure, connecting humanity across time and space. The myths of the Sumerians were not just ancient fables, they were the building blocks of storytelling itself, shaping how humans have shared meaning for thousands of years. The Sumerians left behind more than just clay tablets and cities. They left mysteries that continue to puzzle historians and archaeologists today. Some discoveries are ordinary at first glance, but slowly, when studied, they reveal a civilization far more advanced and complex than most people realize. Take, for example, the ancient artifacts that suggest early knowledge of astronomy, mathematics, and engineering far beyond what one might expect for 5,000 years ago. Tablets with precise star charts, diagrams of the moon, and calculations for time show that the Sumerians were quietly mastering knowledge. Other discoveries hint at technologies and ideas that challenge what we thought humans could achieve in that era. Intricate tools, detailed maps, and records of trade across great distances suggest a society highly organized, connected, and capable of planning far into the future. Some tablets even describe machines or devices in ways that remain mysterious to modern scholars. Then there are the enigmatic stories and myths preserved on clay, blending history and imagination. These tales often mention unusual events, strange visitors, or divine interventions. While some might dismiss them as legend, researchers notice patterns and similarities across cultures, suggesting that these ancient stories hold kernels of truth that echo through time. Even the cities themselves challenge expectations. Ziggurats, canals, and irrigation systems reveal advanced engineering and urban planning. Floods and droughts were managed with surprising sophistication. Civilization was not just surviving, adapting, and innovating in ways that sometimes seem almost modern. These unusual discoveries remind us that history is not static. Every tablet, artifact, and ruin offers clues that can rewrite what we know about early human achievement. The Sumerians were thinkers, dreamers, and problem solvers. They remind us to question assumptions and look closer at the past, where whispers of intelligence, creativity, and ingenuity still echo. Among the many myths of the Sumerians, none is more famous or more mysterious than the story of the Great Flood. In this tale, the gods, displeased with humanity, decide to send a massive flood to cleanse the world. Water rises, rivers overflow, and the land is swallowed, threatening to erase all life. But one man, warned by a god, builds a large boat to survive the deluge. He gathers his family, animals, and provisions, floating safely as the waters cover the earth. After days, weeks, or even months, the flood recedes and life begins anew. The gods bless the survivor, and the story becomes a lesson in obedience, cleverness, and human resilience. This flood myth is not just a story echoes across cultures. Versions appear in Babylonian, Hebrew, Greek, and even Hindu traditions, suggesting that the idea of a great flood resonated deeply in the ancient world. Scholars debate whether these myths were inspired by real events, perhaps massive floods along the Tigris and Euphrates, or whether they were purely symbolic tales of renewal and survival. The story also reveals how the Sumerians viewed their world. Life was fragile, dependent on the rivers and the favor of the gods. Humans had to respect nature, honor divine authority, and use intelligence and planning to survive. Every detail, from gathering animals to building the boat, demonstrates practical knowledge intertwined with myth. Even today, the legend of the Great Flood captures our imagination. It reminds us that stories are powerful, preserving lessons about life, survival, and humanity's place in the universe. Slowly, softly, it whispers that even when faced with overwhelming challenges, cleverness, courage, and foresight can guide us through. The Sumerians were meticulous record keepers. Every trade, harvest, and festival was carefully documented on clay tablets. Over time, these tablets formed what could be called the first libraries, collections of knowledge, stories, and wisdom preserved for future generations. Some of these archives were enormous, stored in temples and palaces. Scribes cataloged tablets in careful order, recording everything from mundane transactions to myths, prayers, and early scientific observations. These libraries were the heartbeat of Sumerian civilization, quietly ensuring that knowledge survived even when rulers changed or cities fell. Yet, much of this knowledge was lost over time. Floods, fires, invasions, and simple neglect buried or destroyed countless records. Entire collections vanished, leaving gaps in the story of humanity's earliest civilizations. What we have discovered so far represents only a fraction of what once existed, like fragments of a vast, ancient puzzle. Despite the loss, the surviving tablets offer astonishing insights. They reveal laws, mathematical calculations, astronomical observations, and literary works that challenge assumptions about early human intelligence. Some tablets even suggest sophisticated administration, diplomacy, and trade practices that allowed Sumerian cities to flourish. The idea of lost libraries also sparks the imagination. One can almost picture a grand Sumerian archive, shelves stacked with clay tablets, scribes working quietly, and the scent of mud and ink in the air. Each tablet, whether a grocery list or a myth, carries the voice of a civilization reaching across millennia. These lost libraries remind us that knowledge is precious, fragile, and powerful. Even when forgotten, its echoes survive, waiting to be discovered, deciphered, and understood. Slowly, gently, the past whispers its lessons, inviting us to listen, learn, and appreciate the ingenuity of the Sumerians. The Sumerian civilization, once vibrant and thriving, did not fall overnight. Its decline was slow, gradual, and complex, like the soft erosion of riverbanks over centuries. Environmental changes, conflicts, and political shifts all contributed to the fading of the cities that had once been the heart of Mesopotamia. Floods and droughts posed constant challenges. Canals that had once nourished the land sometimes silted up, and salt from irrigation slowly degraded fertile soil. Crops failed, and the once abundant rivers became unpredictable. The Sumerians had learned to master their environment, but nature has a way of testing even the cleverest civilizations. Political instability also played a role. City-states competed for resources, territory, and influence. Kings rose and fell, alliances shifted, and some cities were conquered by outsiders. Over time, power centralized in a few dominant cities, while smaller settlements were absorbed or abandoned. Slowly, the intricate tapestry of independent city-states unraveled. Cultural changes and migrations brought new peoples and ideas into the region, while the Sumerians' achievements, writing, mathematics, architecture, and trade persisted. Their language and customs gradually merged with those of surrounding civilizations, like Akkadians and Babylonians. Sumer, as a distinct society, slowly faded, leaving echoes of its brilliance behind. Even in decline, Sumer left a profound legacy. Their innovations endured, spreading to other cultures and forming the foundation of human knowledge. Temples, ziggurats, clay tablets, and myths survived the centuries, whispering lessons of resilience, creativity, and human ingenuity. The story of Sumer's decline is a reminder that civilizations rise and fall, but their ideas can endure far longer than their cities. Slowly, gently, the memory of Sumer flows through history, like a river leaving its mark on the land. Even after the decline of Sumer, its knowledge, inventions, and stories traveled far and wide, shaping the civilizations that followed. The Sumerians may have faded as a distinct culture, but their innovations laid the foundation for much of human history. Trade was one of the most powerful ways knowledge spread. Merchants carried clay tablets, tools, and goods along rivers and deserts, connecting Sumerian cities with distant lands. Along with trade, ideas traveled. Mathematics, astronomy, writing, and administration were passed to neighboring civilizations like the Akkadians, Babylonians, and Assyrians. Slowly, Sumerian techniques and innovations became the backbone of these emerging societies. Writing, of course, was perhaps the most influential legacy. Cuneiform inspired other scripts and record-keeping systems across Mesopotamia. With writing, governments could organize, merchants could trade more effectively, and stories, myths, and laws could be preserved. Even centuries later, scribes continued to adapt and expand Sumerian knowledge, showing just how enduring it was. Sumerian mathematics, astronomy, and engineering also traveled beyond their borders. Their sexagesimal counting system, calculations of angles, and early star charts influenced architecture, calendars, and scientific thinking in civilizations far beyond Mesopotamia. Their practical innovations, city planning, and trade networks became models for generations to come. Even myths and literature spread across cultures. Flood stories, creation tales, and heroic journeys traveled with traders and scribes. evolving into versions that appear in Babylonian, Hebrew, Greek, and other ancient texts. Slowly, the Sumerians' imagination seeped into the wider human story. The Sumerians remind us that even when a civilization disappears, its knowledge can live on, grow, and inspire. Ideas are more enduring than walls or rivers. They ripple through time, quietly shaping the world long after their creators are gone. The Sumerians may have lived thousands of years ago, but their records, tablets, and stories still speak to us today. Every clay tablet, every wedge-shaped mark, is a whisper from the past, reminding us that humans have always been curious, creative, and determined to understand the world around them. These ancient records reveal the birth of writing, mathematics, astronomy, trade, and governance. They show how humans first organized themselves into cities, created laws, and shared stories to explain life's mysteries. In many ways, the Sumerians were the first architects of civilization, laying the foundations for societies that would follow across the centuries. Even myths and legends have lasting value. Tales of floods, gods, creation, and heroism connect us to the thoughts, fears, and dreams of people who lived long before us. They remind us that human imagination and storytelling are timeless, echoing across cultures, generations, and continents. The tablets, artifacts, and ruins of Sumer show us that knowledge can survive even when civilizations decline. The lessons, discoveries, and ideas they left behind quietly continue to influence our understanding of history, science, literature, and society. They teach patience, observation, and the gentle persistence of human curiosity. So, as we drift through the story of Sumer, from bustling cities to ancient kings, from mysterious gods to the first scribes, we can feel a quiet connection across thousands of years. Every tablet, every record, is like a small bridge, linking our present to a distant past, softly reminding us that we are part of a long, continuing story of humanity. And now, as your eyes grow heavy and your mind wanders with the whispers of ancient rivers, cigarettes, and scribes, let the quiet rhythm of history lull you to rest. Let the stories of the Sumerians float gently through your dreams, carrying you softly into the night. Good night.